Pause the recording. All right. Welcome everybody who's here in person. Welcome everybody who is watching asynchronously later on. Glad you're all here. Today is an exciting day. Oh, let's see here. Uh-oh. Okay. Let's see if I can get them in. Man, oh, good. All right, here we go. Class 4 is Jewish holidays. And so we're going to get to know our Jewish holidays, our holiday calendar, make some sense of the different kinds of holidays that we celebrate. There are different categories of holidays that you'll soon find out. And some of them are historical and celebrate historical events. Some of them are pilgrimage festivals in which we used to make our way to the Holy Temple and offer sacrifices from our harvest. And there's all kinds of different holidays that we'll learn about and make sense of the Jewish calendar and find out some of the meaning behind each of the holidays. Let us begin. All right. Let's see if I can blow that up a little bit. All right. Oh, no, that's not good. 200%. Well, that's the best I can do. I apologize. But I'll say it out loud so that we can
Rabbi,
all follow along. Yeah.
Why don't you put it in slide mode?
Put it in slide mode. All
Do
right.
slideshow.
Let's see. Home. Slideshow.
Yeah, and play from start or play from current slide.
Yeah, that's fine. That'll work. All right. Oh, there you go. Very good. It's a little bit bigger there. Okay. Excellent suggestion. Thank you from our next generation of digital natives. There you go.
You're welcome, Rabbi.
All right. So how does one keep alive the incredible feeling of encountering God at Sinai and feeling more human, more significant than you ever did before? Right. So we want to keep that feeling, that intense covenant that we have with God, our evolving covenant that we learned about. How do we keep it alive? Right? How do we keep it fresh? How do we keep it on the top of our minds and feel more human? Right? These festivals and holidays are meant for us to reflect and become more of ourselves, to connect with other people and grow self-growth and self-improvement and become more of ourselves. So how do we do it? One of the ways the Torah offers us is setting aside special days when ordinary concerns are transcended, right? So all week long we deal with and all year round, we deal with our ordinary concerns, getting our work done, paying the bills. So how do we transcend those ordinary concerns so that our souls are free to concentrate on the eternal, right? So we're made of body and soul. Our bodies are temporary and our souls are eternal. How do we get in touch with that eternal sense of being? Even as married couples clear a day to mark their wedding anniversary. Why do we celebrate wedding anniversaries? To recapture the way they felt about each other and what they promised each other on their wedding day, that we'll be together, and that for in bad times and in good times, we are connected by a covenant that we made, promises to each other under the chuppah, with the concentration that their busy lives otherwise don't afford them. We set aside a day to celebrate anniversaries, to remind us of the love that we have for each other. The same thing, says Rabbi Kushner, the same thing is why we celebrate the holidays to reconnect with God, to find ourselves in the big picture of life. And here's the wheel of the calendar. And so let's just review it for a moment. We're going to, learn about each holiday separately, but here's the whole calendar year. We've got Rosh Hashanah, so that starts Tishrei, right? So it's Rosh Hashanah, the new year. So that's where we start the wheel. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur are our high holidays. And then right on the heels of the high holidays are Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, and Simchat Torah, right? Sukkot, as you know, right, we go into our Sukkah with our bodies. It's a very physical experience, hammer and nail to build our Sukkah. And that comes on the heels of our spiritual, soulful Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is where we don't pay attention to our bodies, right? We want to stay completely in spirit and soul, which is why we don't eat, right? Which is why we don't do physical pleasures, right? We want to stay in that soulful realm. Right after that, immediately after, we focus on our bodies. We hammer and nail. We put our bodies inside the Sukkah, and we have the lulav and etrog, which are bodily experiences. And then comes Cheshvan, the month of Cheshvan. Some rabbis call it, the rabbinic tradition is that we call it Mar Cheshvan, which means bitter Cheshvan. Why? Can you guess, right? Because there's no holidays in it. And so it's sort of a lonely holiday and a lonely month. And then comes the month of Kislev, in which we celebrate Hanukkah, right? And then Tevet doesn't have any holidays in it either. Shvat has Tu B'Shvat, right? And we've got Purim in Adar. Nisan is Pesach and Yom HaShoah, right? It's no coincidence that the Jewish calendar has Yom HaShoah on the heels of Pesach, right? Because in Israel, especially, right, in the diaspora, it's a sad and tragic commemoration. But in Israel, they call it Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura. It's Holocaust Day and resistance and the strength, right, that happened right after the Holocaust, namely the state of Israel, right? And so in Israel, it's mixed. It's bitter and sweet. It's Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Day, and the Day of Resistance and Strength. And the next one is Yom HaZikaron, which falls out there in ER, Yom HaZikaron, right, which is the day of commemorating the losses in Israel, right? In Israel, everybody is touched by war, right, in some way. 90% of the community in Israel has suffered a loss, right? A brother, a sister, or a parent in the wars of Israel. And again, it's bitter and sweet. We have Remembrance Day followed immediately by Independence Day, right? And in the afternoon, evening, right, as you know, the Jewish calendar and the daily cycle begins in the evening, right? It was evening and then morning. And so the day starts in the evening. And in the afternoon, evening, they have both. They start the ceremony in pain and mourning, and then they end the ceremony with a celebration of the state of Israel. We also have Lag BaOmer in ER, which is a festival in which we get outside and enjoy the outdoors and celebrate the earth. And Sivan has the festival of Shavuot in it. I'll keep doing that. Okay. There we go. All right. And Av has Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, in which we recite Lamentations. We sit on the floor, we light a candle, and it's also a day of mourning, right? So you can see we have plenty of celebrations of joy, and then we also have our commemorations of mourning. All right, so this is our people's story. right, and we're going to focus on these 10 festivals, right? They're called we're not going to focus on every Jewish holiday. We're going to focus on these 10, right? And so we've got Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, which tell our people's story. We're going to learn in a minute about those, but the overview is it tells our story. Pesach is the Exodus in order, right? Pesach is the Exodus. Shavuot is Mount Sinai, where we receive the Torah immediately after the Exodus. And Sukkot commemorates the wilderness, right? And so these are the 3 pilgrimage festivals, which right, the whole community, Israelite community, came to Jerusalem, right, for these festivals and offered their grain and first fruits, offered some of their harvest in gratitude and appreciation for God's help in the harvest, right? So it takes the farmer, right, to till the earth and to plant the seeds, but it takes God to provide the sunlight and the rain to make it grow. So the moments to pause in the middle there are Shabbat and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Every week, right, we finish our work just like God did in creation. We complete our work on Friday afternoon, and we enter a different kind of space. So Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel called Shabbat a palace in time, right? He said that human civilization mostly, right, tries to conquer space, right? We long for a big house and a big lawn and a big backyard and a big car, right? These are things in space, but Jews are called upon, says Rabbi Heschel, right, to celebrate moments in time, right? Shehechianu v'kiyimanu, thank you, God, for this moment in time. And so Shabbat is known as a palace in time. So Rosh Hashanah comes and Yom Kippur comes, and this is the time for Rosh Hashanah is celebrating the new year, and Yom Kippur is a fast day, of course, that we get soulful. Holidays of history, which we'll learn about, Hanukkah, Purim, and Tisha B'Av. The reason why we call them holidays in history is because we have actual proof and archaeology and secondary sources that sort of prove that Hanukkah, Purim, and Tisha B'Av were actually a part of history, whereas, right, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, right, celebrate something else. Here we go. The big idea, right? So here's what we're going to learn today. The Jewish calendar is an experiential curriculum, right? So some curricula are theoretical or mathematical, right? These are experiential festivals, right, for teaching the most important stories, ideas, and values of the Jewish people. Stories, ideas, values of the Jewish people. With each holiday, we don't just remember a historic event. We do actions that help us to experience, right? And so on Pesach, we're told that not only do we remember the Exodus, right, we have an obligation to re-experience the Exodus. And that means to feel free. And so we sit around the table, we enjoy a beautiful meal together, we tell the story, but we also feel free, right? And so our freedom, is something like, freedom to grow, freedom of religion, freedom from our habits, right, that we've developed that we want to break free of, right? And so really important, right, to experience the freedom of Passover. The same is true for Pesach and Shavuot. I'm sorry, Sukkot and Shavuot. On Sukkot, we commemorate the experience in the wilderness. And so we experience our own wilderness experience, right? And so we get out to our Sukkah and we re-experience what it means to be in a vulnerable, fragile space. And so, right, on Shavuot, we commemorate the giving of the Torah. And so our rabbis teach that there's a voice coming from Mount Sinai all the time. Right? It wasn't just in that moment. Whenever we're open to receiving the Torah, we can re-experience Mount Sinai, right? And so, right, when we're experiencing peak moments of spirituality and achdut and togetherness, we can re-experience Sinai. And so we attempt to do that on Shavuot as we study the Torah and re-experience Mount Sinai. Okay, so let's divide these festivals into different categories, right? And so these are the Shalosh Regalim. Shalosh means three. Regalim is from regel, which means foot, and we march, right? We take a pilgrimage to the temple. And so these are the three pilgrimage festivals. And we still have archaeological evidence that this is what happened, right? So we have the Western Wall, which was a supporting wall that King Herod built, right? And so it's not part of the temple itself. It was a retaining wall during the expansion of the temple. However, we also have the southern steps now, right? And the southern steps is where the pilgrims enter the temple. And so we see those steps now. It's an incredible find and an incredible work of archaeology that we can see the steps and climb the steps that our ancestors came to offer their sacrifices in the temple. There's also, right, in the Psalms, we have Psalms of Ascension, right? And so Shir Lama'alot, right, we sing right before our grace after meals. Shir Lama'alot B'shuv Adonai. And these are the Psalms that we recited as we ascended the steps of the temple. And so these are the three pilgrimage festivals, right? Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. So originally, right, these were pilgrimage festivals, right, in which we all came to the temple. There's also archaeological proof that when we offered animal sacrifices, right, there are two ways to do it. The one way is to drag, our animals, across Israel to come to the temple to offer sacrifices. Not very practical. So what happened was they came to the temple, and there they bought their animals and then offered those animals in the temple. And we have archaeological evidence of the pens that they used to keep the animals, and we found the coins that they used to redeem the animals, to pay for the animals, right? They weren't coins, but they were receipts, right? That somebody paid for the animals, and then they handed the receipt, the coin receipt, to the Kohen, to the priests, and they offered the animals for them. And so what an amazing experience, what an amazing archaeological design, and that we have now that shows what happened during these pilgrimages. So now that we don't have the temple, right, we celebrate and commemorate other things in history, right? So the rabbis in their wisdom transformed the celebrations, the festivals, from harvest celebrations, because most of us aren't farmers. And so instead of offering our wheat and offering our fruit and offering our animals to the temple, they transformed these festivals into commemorations of our history. And Pesach is our exodus from Egypt. Shavuot is our experience on Mount Sinai. And Sukkot is our traveling through the wilderness, right? And so we commemorate the story of our people rather than the harvest. And you can imagine that in a time of harvest, especially a successful harvest, this is a time of joy. And these 3 pilgrimages are meant for us to celebrate, to feel the joy of our ancestors who offered their harvest and our ancestors who freed, that God took out of Egypt, right, to receive the Torah and then off to the promised land. Let's go through them one at a time. Passover, Pessah, is the commemoration of the Exodus, as we know. What it is a symbolic reenactment, right? An experiential curriculum through the Passover Seder. Let's deal with that for a moment, right? And so the maror is our bitter herbs that we have on our Seder plate. You can see our Seder plate over here, right? And so we have our maror, which is we taste the bitterness of slavery. We have the salt water, we taste the tears of the slaves, right? And so it's an experiential, hands-on ceremony to help us re-experience, reenact our exodus from Egypt, from slavery to freedom. We begin in slavery and we end with song and music and celebration and the recitation of the Hallel, which are our celebratory psalms. We also cleanse our home of chametz, of leavened products. Why do we do that? One of the reasons that resonates with me is that bread is puffy and the matzah is flat. The puffiness, right, represents our ego, our arrogance, right, our selfishness, and the matzah, which is flat, is more simple and gets to our humility and simplicity, right? We have Pesach and then Shavuot, which is the commemoration of our revelation at Sinai. Here we have, right, a mountain. Is it a good representation of the Mount Sinai? Our rabbis teach that it was a humble mountain, right? And but here we see, a mountain. Why a mountain? Right, in our ancient days, holiness happened on top of the mountain, right? And so Moses climbs the mountain and God meets him there at the top. What we do is reenact revelation. It's a hands-on experience. We take our books and we open them up and we study them because our books and our oral tradition is now what we use to receive God's light. We can experience revelation every time we learn, every time we study Torah. God's presence rests upon us. And so that's how we re-experience Sinai, through learning and learning together. It's important in Judaism to learn with people, in community, with a teacher and a student, with a pair of people, 2 people studying Torah. It's called a chavruta, which means a friendship. So we have all different kinds of ways to study Torah. And the important piece is that we're interacting with one another as a community, as friends. And that's how we re-experience revelation. We read the book of Ruth because Ruth says, your God is my God, your people are my people. And it reminds us of our original covenant with God. We eat dairy desserts, which is kind of a strange, right? Cheesecake and I don't know, all kinds of tiramisu, all kinds of dairy desserts. Why do we eat dairy desserts? Well, a couple explanations. One technical explanation is that on Sinai, we receive all the laws of shchita, of slaughtering animals in a proper way, as painless as possible, and all kinds of laws around eating meat. And so as we were expecting the Torah in a few days, we only ate dairy in order, because we knew that we were going to receive some laws of meat. I don't love that explanation. Another one is more metaphorical, that the Torah is considered like mother's milk. Just like mother's milk nourishes us, so too does the Torah nourish us. Some others say the land of Israel is referred to as a land flowing with milk and honey. And so we eat the dairy desserts to remind us of the land of Israel and God's promise to us of safety and security in the land of Israel. Whatever the reason, it's delicious and highly recommended. The festival, right? So Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Pesach is the Exodus. Shavuot is Mount Sinai, and Sukkot is our wanderings through the desert. And all right, it comes at a time, I guess, fall, which is the biggest harvest festival that there is in the biblical year. And so it's called Chag, which means the festival, right, with the capital F. It's the festival, and a capital T, I suppose, the festival of all festivals, because it was the biggest festival of the year. And it commemorates the Israelite journey through the wilderness, right, which was a time of when we traveled in huts. And so every night we had to rebuild our huts. And so we used simple huts, and we needed shade because we were in the desert. And so we have our schach, which is our strangest word in the Hebrew language, schach, which is the vegetation that's detached from the tree. And we put it up on the top of our Sukkot. The other thing it commemorates, right, it commemorates the huts that we traveled in. But it says in the Torah that we also were carried in the clouds of glory. And so it also commemorates the clouds of glory that surrounded us when we were traveling through the desert. In the Torah, it says, "V'samachta b'chagecha," you should rejoice on your holidays, "V'hayita ach sameach," and you should be totally joyful. And so we have parties on Sukkot. We travel to different friends' Sukkot, right? And right, there's a tradition to make a l'chaim, right, and be ach sameach, and to be totally happy. So here's the Sukkah. Here's some technical aspects of the Sukkah. They have to be at least 2.5 walls. So this one here is 3.5 walls, but you could also have a Sukkah of 2.5 walls made of any reasonably sturdy material. Right? And so most materials can be used as long as you have 2.5 walls. It's a kosher Sukkah. A roof made of detached plant materials called schach, and it provides more shade than sun. So how much schach do you need on top of your Sukkah? As much as will provide more shade than sun, but through which you can still see the stars, right? And so the rain can still come in. You're still vulnerable to the natural elements of the earth, but you're also experiencing some sunlight, right? And the sunlight, represents enlightenment. And so we can experience God's presence through the light that shines through, but God's presence is a little bit hidden. And so we're still sort of in the darkness and in the shade these days. Large enough to fit at least one person, right? So you can make a tiny little sukkah and eat there by yourself, but that's no fun. And a table, though you're going to want it at least slightly bigger so that you can celebrate with family and friends. And so some synagogues build giant sukkot so that the whole community can get in there. But you can still have a kosher sukkah with just a few people in it. On Sukkot, we shake the lulav, and we have 4 species which represent all kinds of different things. So originally, historically, it was agriculture and nature, right? And it's probably right, a ancient celebration that probably precedes Judaism, right? So some of our rituals, right, come from pagan rituals, but we Judaicized, right, these rituals, right, to suit our own theology and our own needs, ritual needs. And so it probably used to be, a way to pray for rain, a way to pray, thank God for the bounty of our harvest. But these days, right, what we do is we have a palm branch, our lulav, we have a willow branch from a willow tree, an arava, a myrtle branch, which is a hadass, and an etrog, which is a citron, sort of like a lemon lime kind of thing. But when you slice it open, there's not a lot of meat in there, and a lot of citrus in there, and so some people make etrog liquor, right? And so that works. You can ferment it, and you come out with some delicious, liqueur. But I digress. You have a palm, right? And some people say they represent parts of the body. Right? As I explained before, Sukkot comes right after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And right after being soulful and spiritual on Yom Kippur, you head into the bodily experience. And so they represent parts of the body. The palm branch represents our spine. And as you can see here, the long pine, that looks like a spine. The willow branch, that's over here. Right? The willow branch represents the lips. Right? So you can kind of see that. The hadass, the myrtle branch, represents the eyes. And the etrog represents the heart. And so we take all of our body and we praise God. Another explanation for the four species is they represent different kinds of Jews. So some, well, I won't go into the details, but what it means is on Sukkot, we celebrate the totality of the Jewish people. Very often we split ourselves into denominations, which we went over last week. But on Sukkot, we're in the wilderness, we're in open space, and we remember that we are one people with one heart, right? And that's part of the universality of Sukkot. All right, and Pesach and Sukkot typically last 8 days. And in the diaspora, we celebrate all 8 days. You can see day 1 and 2 are festival days. And then Chol HaMoed as the intermediary days, where it's still festival, but we also go about our daily lives, our ordinary lives, but we keep in mind that it's still a festival day in some respect, half and half, right? It's half festival and half regular. And then at the end of the 8 days, we also celebrate 2 days of festival. And festival days are kind of like Shabbat, in which we take the whole day off and we spend time with family, spend time with community. And so holiday at the beginning, 2 days, and holiday at the end for 2 days. And as you can see, in the land of Israel, it's not 2 days, it's only 1 day. And the Reformed community, the Reformed denomination, has accepted the Israel tradition. It's shorter and more convenient, and probably makes more sense. Here's why. In the days of old, what happened was the new month was transitory, which means we didn't have a complete written calendar like the Muslims these days. When we saw the new moon in the sky, people would rush to the court of law and they had to attest, they had to witness, they need 2 witnesses that saw the new moon in the sky, and the new month was declared. Right? And so it was a spontaneous calendar instead of a set calendar. And so the Beit Din, the court of law, resided in Israel. And so it took a while to get to the diaspora. And so in the diaspora, we weren't sure which day was the exact day of Chag, of festival. It could have been, this day, it could have been that day, and we weren't sure. And so we covered our bases and we celebrated 2 days. So because we didn't know exactly which day was the festival and which day, right, the new month began. The communication system went from mountain to mountain. There lit fires, right, like Native American smoke signals. But ours, where we lit fires on the top of mountains. And when you saw a fire, you lit a fire. And then the next person lit a fire. So as you can imagine, it took a while to get to the Jews on the outskirts and the Jews that lived in the diaspora. And so we covered our bases and just did 2 days instead. Now that in Israel, they knew right away, right? Because the court of law was there. So they only celebrate 1 day. So the question is, now that we know that when exactly it's going to fall because we set our calendar, the question is, do we continue the tradition, or do we adopt and adapt to the new reality that we have a set calendar? And so as you can see on the top of here, it says traditional, which means, hey, we can't change the tradition. Our ancestors celebrate 2 days, so we're going to celebrate 2 days in the diaspora. Or in the Reform community, they say, no, now that we have a set calendar and we know exactly what day the festivals are, we don't need to celebrate 2 days anymore. The conservative movement is somewhere in the middle. There are some people who adopt the Israel 7 days, and there are some people that use the full diaspora experience. Either way, other holidays, right? Shavuot is 2 days in the diaspora, 1 day in Israel. Same thing, same reason why. Rosh Hashanah is 2 days everywhere. Yom Kippur is just a single day everywhere. Hanukkah is 8 days everywhere. We light 8 candles. Purim is 1 day everywhere. And Tisha B'Av, that we're going to learn about, is also 1 day. Moments to pause. Right? So we learned about the Shalosh Regalim, the 3 festival holidays. And now we learn about the moments that we pause. So that's the point of these holidays, is to reflect, is to pause. All week long, we do our work, and on Shabbat, we pause. Right? Stephen Covey, who wrote the book, 7 ways to do this, 7 ways to do that. And what he uses as the last step is sharpen the saw. So what happens if you keep cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting? At some point, the saw is going to get dull. The same is true with us. If we just cut and cut and cut and cut, we too will get dull and ineffective. And so Shabbat comes every 7 days in order to pause, in order to strengthen our souls. And the same is true with the high holy days, and they're called Shabbat, Shabbaton. The Sabbath of all Sabbaths, right, is Yom Kippur. And Rosh Hashanah also is a day to pause, celebrate with family, reflect, learn, come to synagogue as a community, and declare our freedom from work, right? A common problem in today's society is you have 24/7 access to work, right? We check our phones, we check our emails, and we're working all the time, 24/7. And so Shabbat is a moment to declare our freedom. It's a revolution, right? That we're not our work. We are ourselves. We are our identity. And it combats workaholism to declare our freedom and say, I'm more than the work that I do. I'm a human being. I'm a family person. I'm a member of a community and not all about work. The notes I handle no better than many pianists, says Arthur Schnabel, a pianist and composer, a little while ago. The notes I handle no better than many pianists, right? We all kind of play the same notes. We all, have legato and pianissimo, and right, everything is right there. Right? We can read the notes, and we're all in the same kind of realm in terms of playing the notes. However, the pauses between the notes, that's where the art resides. The pauses between the notes, not overplaying. That's where the art resides. The same is true with public speaking, right? If you just keep going and rattle and rattle and rattle, right? At some point, the listeners are going to get bored and overwhelmed. But the pauses between the notes, the pauses in our speaking, that's where the art resides. And so Shabbat and the high holidays are meant for us to pause. Holidays of history, right? The three holidays of history: Hanukkah, Purim, and Tisha B'Av. Rabbi Yitz Greenberg in The Jewish Way writes, holy days provide a record of the struggle to be faithful to the covenant. Right? All these were sort of fights and clashes. While chronicling history, they distill the lessons learned along the way. And because they are popular, right? Hanukkah is very popular, Purim and Tisha B'Av a little less so, the holidays make the dream and the process of its realization the possession of the entire people. Right? It's not just for academics and rabbis, it's scholars. It makes the dream and the realization of that dream for all of us, and we all celebrate together. Hanukkah, right, is Antiochus versus the Syrian Greeks. And so the Syrian Greeks is a little bit, it's a term that's a little bit confusing. And so when Alexander the Great, what made Alexander the Great so great? He was the first one who understood what it meant or created the empire. And so what happens is Alexander the Great conquers a city, a people, and in the old days, before Alexander the Great, pillage, destroy everybody who's in there and move in for ourselves. However, Alexander the Great said, no, we can just have them continue to do what they do, just pay tribute, right, to the empire. And in that way, right, we get money, we get power, and we can slowly but surely influence our empire. And they had a lot to offer, right? They had the Colosseum, they had the Olympiada, they had all kinds of, they had bathhouses, they had all kinds of attractive things in their culture that persuaded the people to become more Hellenistic, right? And so finally, the Maccabees, who are a small band of priests who lived in the city of Modi'in, began a revolt. And the revolt, right, was there. It took 3 years to defeat the Syrian Greek army. And Hanukkah means rededication. We retook our temple. And we know the story about the Hanukkah, right? They found only one little canister, and the canister that was meant to only last one night lasted for 8 nights, right? That's the story of the light. And historically, we know a little bit about the Maccabean revolt. And one of the theories is that the Seleucids and the Ptolemy were in a battle. And so the Syrian Greeks were having a hard time in the empire. and that's why they're a little bit weakened. And we were able to conquer them with a small band, a small army, defeated, the huge army. And it was a miracle, right? We celebrate. But historically speaking, the Syrian Greeks had diminished in power, and so it was easier to conquer them than it would have been if they were strong. How to light the Hanukki. There's a little video, but we sing the prayers, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, right? And then we light the Hanukki, one for the first night with the shamash. That's actually two, but the shamash is serves the other candles. We light the other candles with the shamash, and so there's one more than each night. Right, and then till we fall, and we fill all 8 nights of Hanukkah, and we have a full Hanukkah experience. We put the candle in the window because we want to show the world, right, that we're still here. We have our light, which represents our soul and enlightenment, and we put it out for all to see, right, to tell the world that the kingdoms have risen and fallen, but the Jewish people, Mark Twain writes a beautiful story about that. And we're the only people that have lasted from antiquity until today. Purim is another history celebration, and King Ahasuerus of Persia needs a new queen. Esther, the beautiful Queen Esther, convinced by Mordecai, is selected in a beauty pageant. So she's in the harem of the king, and she wins the royalty. Haman, the king's evil advisor, and when we read the Purim story, we go boo, right? And in our synagogue, the evil advisor develops a personal grudge against the Jews because Mordecai refuses to bow to him. Because in Judaism, we only bow to God. We don't bow to any human being, including the king, and including Mordecai. Including Haman, who was an advisor to the king. King Ahasuerus signs an order of genocide against the Jews of Persia. Right? Haman convinces him that the Jews are a people who rebel and are damaging to the world. We've seen this before in our time as well. And the king signs an order. Esther, with the encouragement of Mordecai, risks her life to save her people. And Haman winds up executed instead of the Jews. Right? And it says that Haman was hung on the tree that was intended for Mordecai. Much rejoicing ensues. And today we still rejoice. We rejoice in the spring. It's probably no coincidence historically that comes around the same time as Mardi Gras, in which everything is upside down, and much rejoicing ensues. Also, not a coincidence that Mordecai and Esther sound a lot like Marduk and Ishtar, which are Babylonian gods. Right? And so again, we take the history of polytheism and we make it our own, and we make it monotheistic. Purim, right, is our time to turn everything upside down. It goes topsy-turvy. And in yeshivot and in academies of study, there are plays that kind of mock the administration, right? And it's a little bit dangerous, but socially speaking, but that's what they do. And there's actually some scholarship from secondary sources that proves the historicity here. The king, instead of Ahasuerus, was known as Xerxes, and he sought consolation in his harem after he was defeated at a place called Salamis, which was in Greece. And then he sought comfort in his queen Esther. And so there is some secondary sources that show that Purim actually happened. The 4 mitzvot of Purim, that's how we celebrate, not like Mardi Gras, but rather we read the Megillah, we retell the story, we celebrate, and then give gifts to friends, right? Isn't that nice? That Judaism source of joy is to give gifts to friends, right? And right, that's our job in this world, to conquer our self need and give to friends, give extra charity also brings us joy. Finally, we have Tisha B'Av, which is the commemoration of all the tragedies of Jewish history, particularly the destruction of the temples. And so Tisha B'Av not only commemorates the tragedies of the temples, which is, what we read in Lamentations, but all the different tragedies that happen through history get commemorated on Tisha B'Av. Why? Because, we don't want to spend the whole calendar commemorating all the tragedies that befell the Jews in history. And so we combine them all in Tisha B'Av. Originally, Yom HaShoah, right, Holocaust Day, right, there was a debate whether it should be included in Tisha B'Av or a separate commemoration. And as you can see, the Holocaust became its own commemoration. But it took a while to make that decision in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament. There was a debate that raged on for years in the 1950s, whether it should be included in Tisha B'Av as kind of a religious commemoration, or the state of Israel was founded by secular Israeli Jews. And so it became sort of a secular festival in which there's no fasting, right? There's no particular Jewish rituals. We have ceremonies, but we don't do much religious ritual. And so it became a separate sort of secular commemoration. Before Tisha B'Av, there's 3 weeks of mourning, and how it shows up in the summertime is that people don't swim, right? And we don't do fun activities or go to movies. And then there's 3 weeks and then 9 days before Tisha B'Av of more intensity as we gear up for the commemoration of Tisha B'Av. On Tisha B'Av, we read the book of Lamentations, which comes from our Ketuvim. As you recall, Tanakh is Torah, prophets, and writings. And so Lamentation comes from the section of writings. And there's also an interesting twist on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th day of Av, right? That's what it means. Tisha is 9, and Av is the month of Av. From destruction to redemption. In rabbinic tradition, the Messiah is to be born on Tisha B'Av, right? Future redemption is born out of this destruction. Without darkness, there can be no light. And we thank God in our monotheistic religion. We thank God for the darkness and the light, rolling away the darkness and shining the light. We thank God for both. And that's why the tradition of the Messiah is to be born on Tisha B'Av. And so that concludes our trip through the Jewish calendar. Just as quick reminders, right? We've got our 3 pilgrimage festivals. We've got our time to pause, which is Shabbat and the High Holy Days. And then we've got our historical commemorations, Hanukkah and Purim and Tisha B'Av, which commemorate a moment in history. And so, as you can see, they have different flavors, different tones, right? And it gives us a sense of peoplehood. It gives us a sense of humanity. And we're reminded of our values and our community that gives us all this support. We travel through the years together. The rabbis asked the question, which is the most important holiday festival. Pesach is the most celebrated festival, but the rabbi says it's not the most important. Which is the most important festival on the Jewish calendar? Shabbat, right? Because it comes every 7 days, and it's right the amazing opportunity to declare our freedom, to have a revolution against the yoke of work, and reminds us of our humanity. And so Shabbat comes more frequently than everything else, and it has the most impact on our lives. And so thank you for being here today. Thank you for those watching later. Appreciate your presence. And I hope this gives you a sense of the meaning and the construction of our Jewish calendar. Any questions, concerns?
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
I've been wondering this. Why do you sacrifice an animal?
Good question. Yeah. So at the time, so this was a long time ago, right? And at the time, all religions were sacrificing animals. And so we were just sort of going along with the tradition, right? And that's what Judaism does. Judaism evolves along with the world. And so now that everybody sort of prays instead of offering sacrifices, that's what we do too. And it's important to remember that the priests used to eat the sacrifices, right? So we came to the temple, we offered our animals and sheep and goats. And at night, the priests used to feast on the barbecue that was on the altar. And so it's not that much different than Texas barbecue, right, that we had. And so if you're a vegetarian, you think that's cruel. But if you're a meat eater, it's not so different than what we do today.
No, I was just wondering because I've been reading some stuff you gave me and stuff like that. So I've been wondering about that.
Yes, right. And the modern prayer system is based on the routine of the temple offerings. So there's a morning offering, an afternoon offering. And so that's what we base our current prayer system on.
Okay.
All right. Thank
Rabbi,
you so much. Yeah.
I just wonder if the people who came to make the sacrifices didn't join in those meals with the priest.
Yeah, it was they offered it to the temple, and the priests didn't work. They didn't have a job. Their only job was to serve in the temple. And so they didn't have money, salary to pay for the food. And so they were supported by the community.
But did the individuals who made sacrifices maybe stay and have dinner with the
Yes,
priest?
the only one was on the Passover Seder, right? You're correct. The Passover Seder was cooked and then eaten by the people who gave them. And they feasted in families, family groupings. But all the rest of them were eaten by the priests.
Donations.
And it was a real sacrifice, right? They call it sacrifice because it was sacrifice, right? That it, we
Okay.
sacrificed our own possessions in order to support the priests and offer our sacrifice to God and to thank God and appreciate the earth that nurtured the animals and nurtured our vegetation and our wheat. And so that was the kind of stuff. It wasn't all animals. It's also flour and wheat and right, fruits, right, all kinds of different things that were brought to the temple.
Right. I sometimes wonder why Sukkot doesn't come before Rosh Hashanah.
Go ahead. Say more about that.
Because if it's a harvest holiday and if you're bringing the product of your harvest to the temple, it seems backwards to me.
Makes sense, right? So we're made of body and soul, and you're asking a good question, right? So right? The soul is eternal, and the body is temporary. And so perhaps that's why. But yeah, it's a good question. I don't really have a good answer for that. It developed in that way. Yeah, I don't have a great answer for that. Good question. Yeah, you stumped the rabbi. And why was it in that order? I'm not sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Rabbi, I have a question really quickly.
Yeah, sure.
I'm taking the class for conversion, and I can't make it every Wednesday for 12. I
Yes.
was wondering if I could still like watch the recordings.
Yes,
Is that
yes.
possible? And I still
Absolutely.
get credit?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
you know, it's the same thing. And you can just pretend it's live. And it's the same.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Have a great day, everybody.